week 15 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few tight ends I would drop this week. The first guy, Foster Moreau, the Las Vegas Raiders. I thought Moreau was going to be a great pickup a few weeks ago when Waller went down with his injury at the Dallas Cowboys on Thanksgiving Day. But right here, Moreau, he just hasn't done anything for fantasy owners. The last 3 weeks for him, week 12 at Dallas, 1 catch, 3 yards. Week 13 versus Washington, a catch, 34 yards. And week 14 in a blowout loss at the Kansas City Chiefs, 3 catches, 13 yards. So week 15 here, they got a matchup at the Cleveland Browns that give up the 17th least amount of fantasy points to tight ends on the season. And Waller, it's possible he's going to come back, but in my opinion, this Raider team, there's really no reason to rush him back. They've lost 4 out of 5 games, and they're falling quickly down the standings over there in the AFC West. So right here, Moreau, he's been started in a lot of leagues over the last couple weeks here. But after 2 dud performances in a row with a starting job, there's really no one I could trust on this Raider team, maybe besides Hunter Renfrow, obviously, who had a huge ball game, and Josh Jacobs. But besides that, no one else is putting up numbers or fantasy worthy. So right now, Foster Moreau is an easy drop this week, in my opinion. The next tight end's Tyler Conklin of the Minnesota Vikings. So it's a hot and cold type of thing all season here with Tyler Conklin. 1 week he'll have a big week, and then the next week he'll put in a dud like he did in week 14 versus Pittsburgh, where this Viking team did score 36 points. I know Dalvin Cook rushed over 200 yards in this ball game, but he only had 2 catches for 20 yards, and Adam Thielen was out as well. So the last few games here for Conklin, week 12 at San Francisco, 2 catches, 25 yards. Week 13 at Detroit, 7 catches, 56 yards. And week 14, like I mentioned, 2 for 20 versus Pittsburgh. So week 15, believe it or not, at the Chicago Bears. The Bears give up the 6th least amount of fantasy points to tight ends on the season. So right here, if Adam Thielen's back, which I think he might be in this game, it was just a short week for him to come back quickly, that Tyler Conklin's going to have a tough ball game in this one, not getting any targets and not getting many yards here. So right here, I don't see Conklin doing much versus the Bears. I could definitely be wrong, but right now he did get added in 18% of fantasy leagues to get his percentage up to 48% owned. But after this week here, for teams that are in the playoffs, I think he's going to be dropped off a little. And a tight end drop this week, and the third and final tight end I would drop this week is Jared Cook of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Jared Cook, I thought he would have a huge game versus the New York Giants in week 14, especially with Keenan Allen out of the lineup. But that wasn't the case. I know he found the end zone, but he had 2 catches for 8 yards with a goal line touchdown over there for this Charger team. So the last few weeks here for Cook, he really hasn't been doing much. Week 12 at Denver Broncos, 2 catches, 25 yards, a touchdown. Week 13 at Cincy, 3 catches, 29 yards. And week 14 versus the Giants, 2 catches, 8 yards, and a touchdown. So Cook pretty much, he's a touchdown-dependent tight end over here. And that's not the worst thing in the world, I know it. But right here, you would think he'd be getting targeted more from a gunslinger and a guy who throws the football a lot like Justin Herbert. That just hasn't been the case. I know he's a good matchup on paper in week 15 versus Kansas City. That's the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends. But right here, I just can't trust Cook in a big spot in a playoff game here in fantasy, because if you don't get a touchdown, this guy's pretty much only putting up 5 or 6 points in PPR leagues. So in my opinion, it's easier to drop him. So that's a few tight ends I would drop here for week 15 of the fantasy football season.